Welcome to the Authentic Change Podcast. I'm Mike Horn, your host, and this podcast is for leaders and coaches who need and want fresh perspectives on what it means to live and to lead authentically. You're a leader who wants to make a difference, but sometimes you feel stuck. You know there's more to life and to leadership than what you're currently experiencing. It can be tough to figure out how to grow as a leader. You might be reading all the blogs and books, but it still feels like you're not making progress. You might even be feeling like you're doing everything wrong. On Authentic Change with Mike Horn, we interview experts who share their insights on how to live and lead authentically. Our guests are trendsetters in building great leaders, teams, and organizations. We provide fresh perspectives on what it means to live with purpose and authenticity. Welcome to this episode of the Authentic Change Podcast. Welcome to this episode of Authentic Change with Mike Horn. I am absolutely delighted to have in the studio today, our virtual studio, Kevin Palmieri. And he's got a remarkable story that you can learn more about at his podcast, which we're going to talk about, Next Level University. And you can certainly learn more about Kevin at nextleveluniverse.com. And you'll find all of this in the show notes for all of our faithful listeners and for our new listeners. Kevin is the CFO, founder, and co-host of Next Level University, which is a global top 100 self-improvement podcast with more than 1,200 episodes and 700,000 listens in over 140 countries. I'm going to let Kevin tell his story about how he got here, because it is a remarkable, not quite a Horatio Alger story, but another Phoenix story. And looking forward so much to being in conversation with Kevin Palmieri today. Learn more about him at nextleveluniverse.com. But Kevin, introduce yourself to our audience. Thanks.
Well, first of all, thank you for the wonderful introduction and the kind words. I appreciate it very much. So today I am Kevin Palmieri, and I am all those things, the CFO and the founder and all that. And I'm a podcaster. I love talking into this microphone. That is my favorite thing in the world to do. And at one point that was genuinely just a dream of mine. But where I am today is not where I've been forever. And I always love to say that because I think sometimes we get caught in the emotion of people's success stories. So to your point, Mike, when I was 25 years old, I had what most people would consider success. I had a very beautiful girlfriend who was a model. I had a sports car. I had the body of my dreams. I had just competed in and won a bodybuilding show, high paying job, new apartment, all the trappings of success.
Of success, of masculinity. Yeah. Right. Okay.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah. And my girlfriend.
For a 25-year-old.
For a 25-year-old.
Right.
Yeah. Again, all things considered, I didn't know what I was doing, but right. I assumed I did. And I think we all do at some point in our lives.
Yeah, great.
My girlfriend ended up leaving me because I was such an insecure, scarce, fearful, unconfident man. She wanted to move across the country from the East Coast to the West Coast and chase her dreams. And I was unable to support that mission. I was just so afraid of being left behind, not being good enough. I just couldn't do it. So she ended up leaving me. And when she left me, I kind of had a rock bottom where my rent just doubled. Work is slow. I don't know if I like myself, which is the hardest thing out of all those things. But I kind of made a mistake. And I said, you know what I need to do? Yeah, it's nice to understand myself at a deeper level, but I need to go focus on making more money. Because if I make more money, I'm not going to have as many problems. I'll have more opportunity. So that next year starts off and I get a promotion at my company. So I worked in the weatherization industry. So we would go into state-owned buildings, primarily schools, and we would make them more energy efficient. The beautiful side of things was, since I worked for state contracts, I made anywhere from $60 to $120 an hour. Downside is I spent 10 months out of that next year on the road because our contracts were all over the country. But we get to the end of the year, final pay stub in hand. And I said, did I do it? I wanted to make $100,000. Did I do it? I made $100,000 at 26 with no college degree, but I had another one of those moments where I realized That's really good for the external world. It looks really good on paper, but I'm not any more confident. I'm no more secure. I'm still afraid of my own shadow. And I realized that for most of my life, especially that year, I lived unconsciously, just going through the motions, not knowing why I was doing what I was doing. The opposite of unconscious is hyperconscious. So I started a podcast called the Hyper Conscious Podcast. I fall in love with podcasting as I am falling out of love with my job. I've already accomplished my goal and I know I'm not willing to do all the work to accomplish it again. So I start calling out of work. I start leaving the job site early, showing up late, not the model employee I once was. And my mental health started to turn, my physical health started to turn because I'm just staying up for days on end. And I just know that there's an expiration date here, but I'm not brave enough to leave. I don't know what to do. I don't know how to get out of this. I feel like I fell into such a lucky role. I'm so afraid to leave this all behind. So it all came to a head in a hotel room in New Jersey, just 6 hours away from where I lived. My alarm clock went off at 5:15. I got up, getting ready for a job that day, just like I had done 1,000 times before, slide to the edge of the bed, lacing up my work boots. But that morning, Mike, it was like there was 10 televisions on in my head at the same time, and every single one was on a different station. And one is saying, you're stuck here forever. I know you don't like this. I know you're miserable, but you will quite literally never get an opportunity like this again. Do not screw this up. If you do work up the courage to leave, what are your friends going to say? You make more money than all your friends. What is your family going to say? Your family is very, very proud of what you've created. And the loudest one for me was, do you really think you're going to be a podcaster? Is that really what we're going to do? Like, we're going to leave this and go podcast. And in that moment, I felt that if I was to take my life, I would take my problems with me. Now, I'm very blessed because I have an amazing group of human beings around me. So I was vulnerable and I was brave, and I reached out to one of my friends at the time. I said, hey, Alan, I'm struggling, man. I'm having these thoughts. I'm having these feelings. I don't know what to do. What do you think I should do? And Alan is somebody who has studied self-improvement for most of his life. And he said, Kev, for the last couple of years, your awareness has shifted a ton, but your environments have remained the same. I think it's time for you to change your environment. So I ended up leaving that job 3 or 4 months later and becoming a very broke entrepreneur, trying to figure out this whole game and just tap into the mission. And that was 5 years ago. And we've been doing it every day since then, trying to get a little bit better. And here we are. Now we have a wonderful community and we get to help people every single day.
You raised such interesting points for exploration, Kevin, and thank you so much for sharing your story.
Of course.
Raises topics about mental health and awareness and directing the significance of your life and career, all topics that the folks who listen to Authentic Change with Mike Horn have interest in. And I want to pick up on a couple of themes that you introduced. Vulnerability, braveness, and dreamscapes or dreams. And, as you reflected on your 25-year-old self and, in that 20-something angst, where are you today? I mean, in terms of vulnerability, in terms of bravery, in terms of chasing a dream?
Yeah, it's interesting. My understanding now of bravery is drastically different because I understand that most of my fears are irrational and they're made up. But I understand emotionally they're terrifying, but logically, I'm afraid of planes. All I really have to do is get on the plane. And then everything is kind of out of my control. And then logically, it's the safest form of travel there is on the planet. So bravery to me now is vastly different than it used to be. I think it used to come from a place of ego, where I'm going to look really brave if I just lean into my ego. Now, I think bravery and vulnerability are very, very similar, where I tell people all the time, I'm afraid of failure. I'm afraid of judgment. I'm afraid of planes and sharks. But in a realer sense, I am afraid of what everybody is thinking about me in this moment. And as somebody who is on the microphone or in front of audiences often, that's a challenge. So my take on bravery now is it's not the amazing things that people see that's bravery. It's the conversations behind the scene with your partner that's challenging. It's the challenging conversations you have with yourself, with your business partners, with the people that you work with. It's a lot of, for me, it's a lot of that internal stuff. Those conversations that you don't really want to have with yourself, but you know you should. That is what bravery is to me now. And I think vulnerability is just something that, I don't know, as a masculine human being, I used to think vulnerability equaled weakness. But by definition, vulnerability is difficult. And something that is difficult requires strength. So now I've shifted that where I think the more vulnerable I am, the realer I am, the more relatable I am. Therefore, I can help more people. And the more courage I ultimately show. That's how I feel about it now.
In my work, I describe and work with others, coach folks on the use of self. Do a lot of work on use of self. And part of that is having some self-awareness. It's in addition to understanding your values and to use your agentic behavior, use your agency in order to fulfill your mission, to create change, to see the world more abundantly. And for you, why is self-awareness so important?
Mhm. It's one of those interesting things where we really only have one thing in this life, and that is ourselves. And to the level that you understand yourself, I believe is the level that you can understand everything else. So my story for this, or my analogy for this, is always, if you are to meet somebody and that person makes you feel any type of way, they make you feel happy, they make you feel intimidated, you feel like they have an ego, whatever it may be, odds are you're at least 50% of that interaction. And self-awareness to me is you understanding, oh, Mike isn't arrogant. Mike is just very confident. And since I'm insecure, I'm kind of villainizing him for some reason. Like, what is that all about? Have I done that in my past? How do I change myself and stop myself from doing that in the future? So for me, I think self-awareness is power. Self-awareness, if you can take control of your own thoughts, your own beliefs, your own insecurities, and understand yourself, a lot more becomes possible for you. There's a lot of opportunities when you understand how you operate. So it's very much like, I don't really know how my car works. My awareness around mechanics in my vehicle is just not super high. My ability to impact it, influence it, and make it better is just very, very low. So my car awareness is very low. And if you think about it, what do? You have to bring it to somebody else to get it fixed. So self-awareness gives you the opportunity to work on yourself internally. And I think that's where all shift starts anyway.
Sure. I think about it in terms of polarities that if I want to claim more of my identity, more of who I am, and I'm a vulnerable person, I also need to understand, what the competent side of myself is as well. Not the confident side of myself. So it's this use of, understanding what's in front of us in terms of what shapes our identities and what shapes our values as a way of making progress, of bringing more of who we are to what we do.
Yeah, it's interesting. I had a thought recently, and it's kind of it just popped in my mind. When you think about some of the humans that are the most confident, I don't know that this is a law. I don't think it is. It's just a thought. But the more confident you are, the better off you are being more vulnerable. Because to your point, the polarities are further apart. So as you get more confident, I think it's important to understand that some of us lose that vulnerability because we feel like we don't need it anymore. The more confident you become, the more you can use it.
You've probably heard other people describe you. What are the three words that people most often use to describe you?
I would say probably caring, kind, and consistent. Those are the three I would say.
Yeah, let's talk about those. Certainly relevant to the exercise of authentic leadership, which most of my audience were on a journey around authentic leadership and how we advance authentic leadership in the world. And maybe all leadership. One of my earliest mentors was a guy named Warren Bennis. Warren wrote a bunch of New York Times bestsellers on leadership, and I think at his most cynical, what he said was that on the topic of leadership, never has so much been written about so little.
Mhm.
And maybe it really, comes down to a couple of things. And this is where I want to pick back up on these descriptors you use around caring and kindness. And tell me the third one.
Consistent.
Consistency, consistent. Um, Maybe what all leadership boils down to is that two things is that you have to care about something,
Mm.
care about people, care about saving the planet, care about encouraging biodiversity. Um, and you have to do something about that care.
Mm. Yeah.
You have to act on that care. So for you, how does it show up in your world, Kevin? How does caring show up?
My ultimate goal is to make people feel like I'm there.
Presence.
Yeah. I mean, we live in an interesting world where like a lot of our community lives in other places. They don't live next to me and I don't get to see them personally. But when somebody sends me a message, I want to send them a video. I want you to know that I appreciate the fact that you have taken the time out to let me know that what I'm doing is valuable to you. That means the world to me. And that's why, I'm blessed that I get to do this. So yeah, for me, the caring portion is just showing people that they matter to me regardless of how big of a role they play in what we're doing. I think that's deserved for people.
Yeah, and it's one thing to be nice, but it's different to be kind.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. How do you find kindness surfacing in your work and in your world? How does it show up in your podcast? How does it show up at Next Level Universe?
It's for us, it's very much like I just want to treat you like a human. Nice, it's one of those things where nice is required. Kind is above and beyond. Right? You might meet somebody who says, "Yeah, I'm dating this new person," and they're nice. It's like, well, that's par for the course. They have to be nice. But are they kind? How do they treat other people? Do they go out of their way to make an everlasting feeling for somebody else? Do they want to be remembered in that way? So I just think it's like nice is the tip of the iceberg. And I think kind is when you dig deeper and deeper and you're more intentional and you're more specific with the way you treat people. And that's just how we try to approach everything. I want people to feel included. I want people to feel like they're part of this.
Yes, and I believe that one of the easiest ways to create inclusion is to say hello, is to say hi to somebody. It's our oldest and best technology is to acknowledge somebody by saying hello or saying hi. And as I think about you and consistency, we've talked about caring, we've talked about kindness, all attributes of creating trust in relationships so that people are able to bring more of who they are to what they do. You also talk about consistency. And one of the recent guests on Authentic Change with Mike Horn was Alden Mills. Alden is the inventor of the perfect push-up. He sold like 1 million of them, went viral. And he's a former Navy SEAL, a Naval Academy grad, and a serial entrepreneur in many ways. And what Kevin talks about persistency and the ability to be persistent in life. And, I've been wondering, and I'm sure some in our audience as well, is the differences of persistency and consistency. And perhaps they're somewhat similar. What do you think, Kevin?
I would say they're very similar. I think persistence is kind of crawling through the mud more than like consistency is showing up every day. I think oftentimes persistence has more of a struggle thought behind it.
Well,
So
that certainly would fit in with a Navy SEAL. And,
right.
I think their motto is they'll always have a buddy or something, or you've always got a swim buddy.
Yeah.
So that would make that's a great insight in that regard about moving through the muck and moving through the inconsistency again as you think about it.
I think it's showing up every day. I just think but here's the other interesting thing too, and this is like another layer of consistency. I want everybody that knows me to say Kevin is consistent in his behavior. That doesn't necessarily mean Kevin is always happy. Kevin is not imperfect. He never says the wrong things. It means when he is imperfect and when he says the wrong things, I know his response will be consistent with his character. So I think that's another layer deeper of maybe not an external consistency, but more of a character one.
You've recorded over 1,000 podcasts. Of all the choices that you had in your mid 20s, why podcasting?
I
I mean, people go
finally
to the Peace Corps, people, why podcasting?
I finally felt like I had a purpose. I finally felt like what I was saying mattered. And you know what it was? I listened to Joe Rogan and I remember thinking, imagine if you could do that for a living. Imagine if you could just talk into a microphone. How cool would that be? I was interviewed on a podcast. And after that, I said, oh my goodness, that hour and a half went by so fast. So when I found success and realized that wasn't it for me, podcasting was there. I experienced it. I found flow with it. I found purpose. I found fulfillment. It just made sense. And I think we were at an interesting time with technology where that was starting to become the cool thing. So I just jumped on the wave and I never fell off.
And some of the most important lessons or biggest lessons, I mean, after 1,000+ episodes?
Yeah. Number one lesson, it's very hard to listen to yourself when you're not good at something. That's one. The big thing for me is from day to day, progress is invisible. From year to year, progress is impossible to miss. You know, we do an episode every day. I'm no better today than I was yesterday, but I'm a lot better than I was 5 years ago. And I think sometimes we get stuck in yesterday and today is it's just not that much different. But when you look at however many reps before, that's when you really start to see change. So it's just the importance of showing up intentionally and trying to get a little bit better. I mean, that adds up, but it's very hard to recognize in the short run. But when you have that body of work, Mike, and you have this too, I mean, you can go back 60 episodes and say, those first ones were maybe a little bit rougher than I remember. And that's a good indicator of progress.
Mm-hmm. And in terms of your measures, in terms of how you see your journey, I know that you believe in a heart-driven and no BS approach to holistic self-improvement. What's that mean? Unpack that if you could, Kevin.
Holistic self-improvement is life, love, health, and wealth. I don't want you to make a ton of money at the detriment of your relationship. I don't want you to make a ton of money at the detriment of your health. I want you to have a balanced life of the most love you can have, the most wealth you can have, and the most health you can have. And I think the heart-driven but no BS part is I don't want to have an ego when I give advice. I don't want to say, hey, I don't care, work harder. I want to figure out what's the appropriate amount of push, what's the appropriate amount of pull. You know, the heart-driven part is I just care about people and I want to see them win. And sometimes that is hard and sometimes that puts me in vulnerable spots, but that's what I signed up for and that's the way I want to do it.
Kevin, absolutely amazing. And in terms of, our audience is going to visit nextleveluniverse.com and they're going to find out more about Kevin Palmieri. And I'm wondering, as you, what will people discover there? What will they learn about courses that you have? Will they learn about coaching events? Will they learn about a blog? What will they learn there?
Yeah, I usually say you're going to learn that we're way more than a podcast. So there's a lot of coaching, there's events, there's a blog. We have a foundation, we do live events, we do retreats, we have websites, or we do a lot of different things. So you'll learn that we are more than a podcast and there's a lot going on behind the scenes. And I think that's a really good representation of sometimes what you see is not necessarily what's happening behind the scenes.
And how do you plan to scale and continue to bring the kind of value that you love bringing to the world and that others find value in?
Yeah, the number one way is I really just kind of stay in my genius zone now. So I'm either recording podcast episodes, I'm coaching podcasters, or I'm speaking on podcasting. That's one way. Luckily, we already do 7 episodes a week. So that's as many as we're going to do. And there's more podcast players and there's more listeners than ever. So it's easy to scale there. And then just building the infrastructure behind the scenes and making sure the systems are set up and making sure we're doing the best thing in terms of what is the most valuable use of our time and how do we get a little bit better every day. That really is the name of the game for us.
And Kevin, because so many in our audience are coaches or folks who have been coached, as a coach to podcasters, what do you find some of the most insightful activities, events, activities, actions that you take in successful coaching?
Yeah, it's going to be against the grain to what a lot of people say, but jump on the phone for free with as many people as humanly possible. And over time, I have not seen anything work quite like that. If you jump on the phone with somebody and you add value, especially when it's free, the perceived value is very low. You might be surprised how many people say, "Hey, I'd love to do this every other week. How much does that cost?" I think a lot of people are worried about automation and scale way too early when there's a lot of value in things that aren't automatable and they're not scalable. So I would say if you're early in the journey, focus on those things. And I really believe they pay dividends.
And pay dividends in what ways? I mean, how do people see outcomes? How do people see their progress?
Well, the number one thing is you're building a real authentic relationship with your ideal client, ideal listener, ideal consumer. You get a deeper understanding of what people are actually looking for. You get the deepest understanding of what people are actually struggling with. Going back to the word we used earlier, people feel cared about. They understand your kindness because they're seeing you behind the scenes. So not only can it help you figure out and make progress on understanding your community's problems, but it can lead directly to monetization as well, because people might say, "Hey, this was really valuable. This happened to me yesterday. This was a really valuable call. How much does it cost to work with you?" All right, cool, let's do it. That was based on me just trying to add value. So I think it also helps you hone your message, and it helps you get in front of people and feel more comfortable with that.
So, in many ways, I think what you're doing is you're helping people to create their dream life. You're helping people to realize the potential of that dream they might possess.
Yeah. At the end of the day, you hire a coach for their awareness more often than not, because they either know things you don't yet, they've experienced things you haven't yet, they've gotten over obstacles you haven't yet. Really, what you're trying to do is saying, "Hey, maybe you're in the future of the life that I want. What does it look like and how do I get around those things?" So it's very important to figure out what somebody wants first. But yeah, then it's, this is a potential roadblock for what you're aiming towards, or this is something that you can expect in the next couple of years. I just think you're kind of the guide with the flashlight. You can say, "Hey, around that corner is this, or coming up is this. Let me shine the light over there so you can see it."
I always think that one of the greatest gifts that I bring to my clients is helping to figure out what's a need and what's a want.
Yeah,
And,
it's very important.
working on that clarity
Yeah,
so that makes maybe development a little more possible.
yeah, yeah.
A
Clarity
clear
is a
view in mind.
superpower.
It
Superpower.
is a superpower. That's great. So, Kevin, when folks, I encourage everyone to visit you at Next Level Universe, of course, to tune into the podcast, Next Level University. But if you were, since we're still relatively at the beginning of the year,
Mm.
if you were to offer some guidance or some tips for people in navigating 2023, what would they be?
Number one, focus on sustainability first. A lot of people start out of the gate with these things that are really hard to maintain. So focus on sustainability first. Whatever you're doing, if it's not sustainable, it probably won't last. Once you build in sustainability, then work on consistency. So once it's sustainable, okay, I can do this. I can approach this. I can start this. Let me do it a little bit more. Once you become consistent with it, add in the improvement part. How do you get a little bit better at what you're doing? Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, and just before wrapping up, I mean, it just made me think of it. One other question is, how do you help people in that transition space when they're, letting go of the past, when they're embracing a new order? It's usually never that people are so in love with the past that they can't let go of it, or so afraid of the future that they can't embrace it. It's that period in between. And what guidance or advice again on these tips? Just as our last question, Kevin, to
Sure.
wrap up, what advice or guidance might you give to people who are in this transition?
Yeah, we call that lonely land. The place between where you used to be and where you want to be is usually lonely land. So I think one of the things you can do is you can reflect and say, "Look, I understand you're potentially afraid to leave where you used to be, but what are the positives and negatives you're leaving behind?" But an exercise I always do is I call it the three identities. What is the old identity? What is your current identity? And what is the identity you must adopt in order to become the person that you want to? Which one are you closer to? Because you might be closer to the future identity than the past one. And that's very, very, very empowering. So I think it's really that. It's just giving somebody an appropriate, accurate understanding of where they actually fit into their own life. That is very, very important and impactful. And then it's usually just helping them start some new positive habits, something simple, like one thing under health, one thing under wealth, one thing under love. Nothing crazy, just enough to get the ball rolling so you feel like you're making progress towards that future.
It's so great, Kevin, to have you, one, as a guest, and two, to know all of the great things that you and the folks at Next Level Universe are doing and bringing to the world and adding value. And I want to say thank you.
Of course. Thank you.
To you, Kevin, and your podcast, Next Level University. Just a delight for everyone to tune into. Just a great listen every time that it's available. So thank you, Kevin Palmieri. A delight to be with you in conversation today.
Thank you, Mike. I appreciate it.
All right. Until the next episode of Authentic Change with Mike Horn, stay well. Thank you for listening to the Authentic Change podcast. I'm delighted that you've tuned in to listen. Please visit the show notes for links to topics discussed in today's podcast. To download a free ebook on authentic change and leadership and to subscribe to my newsletter, please visit mike-horn.com. Once again, mike-horne.com, mike-horn.com. Once again, thank you for listening to the Authentic Change podcast.